As we conclude our study of Daniel 11 today, until next time anyway, we draw on Tuesday's study about the way the kings do battle to identify how those kings are manifesting in our world right now. We seek to gain a perspective that will help us to see the movements of the divine world in the current events around us, and in the process, learn what it all means spiritually as time draws nearer to Christ's return. Keep those prophecy hats on for one more day, friends, for today's show called The Hegelian Dialectic of Politics Revealed in Prophecy. Welcome back, everybody. Happy Thursday to you. Today we are finishing our study of Daniel chapter 11 for the week. I'm sure it won't be too long before we're at it again on the show. But for this week, today is going to be our last day. And then tomorrow on Friday, we're not going to have an AI update, but instead we'll kind of conclude all four days of this week's episode tomorrow. So for today, we really want to finish our study in Daniel 11, and therefore we need to start in Daniel 10. That's funny. But actually, before we do any of that, I want to mention our new website again, tdimedia.org. Okay, that's where you want to go. It's still under construction, so be patient with it. But we are aiming to have a complete archive there, as well as a number of other things. So check that out, and that should be your kind of one-stop hub for this show. And then as Talking Donkey International expands and we add more podcasts and other shows like that, we will use that same website to have access to all of our media products. So definitely check that out. And let's get right to it, shall we? Daniel chapter 10. So if you remember yesterday, we saw that beautiful chiastic structure that just runs all the way through chapter 10, all the way through chapter 11, and most of the way through chapter 12. And so therefore, chapter 10 and 11 are linked. They're part of the same linguistic pattern, that chiastic structure there. So it's not dishonest then to gain context or understanding about chapter 11 by going to chapter 10. And that's what we're going to do today. The story of chapter 10 is that Daniel is praying. It's the third year of King Cyrus, and the Jewish people are headed out of captivity at this rough period of time. They had been taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and held captive in Babylon for 2 generations almost. But the appointed time for their release had come, and Daniel is kind of aware of all of that. It says he gets a message and he wants to pray about it. And he spends 3 weeks praying and fasting. And then on the 24th day of the first month, after his 3 weeks of praying, he is visited by an angelic figure, a divine figure, whose appearance is almost identical to the appearance of Jesus Christ in Revelation chapter 1. So I think he was visited by Jesus here. This is Christ himself manifesting in the Old Testament in his divine form. And Daniel saw the vision. The men who were with him did not see the vision. And yet, so now he's like captivated by this. It says he's undergoing physical manifestations as a result. He loses his strength. His vigor is turned to frailty. He falls down as if he's in a deep sleep with his face on the ground. And then suddenly, the angel Gabriel shows up. A hand touched me, and he returns strength to Daniel in pieces. And he says in verse 11, "O Daniel, man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you." And in verse 12, "Do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words." So he's saying, I heard you 3 weeks ago. On the very first day that you did this, heaven heard you. Why did it take me 3 weeks to show up? Well, let's keep reading. Verse 13, "But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, who really that from the Hebrew is better translated as one with the chief prince. I have a handout about that. Maybe I'll try to put it in the show notes. I have a handout about that. One with the chief prince. He came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings of Persia. Now I have come to make you understand. Okay. So what Gabriel is saying there is like, I wanted to come 3 weeks ago, but the prince of Persia. Let's see what's the language. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me. Now that's not Cyrus. Cyrus is called the king. He's never ever called the prince, right? That word prince is used in the same way as it's used to describe Jesus, right? The divine characters and non-human characters. So the prince of the kingdom of Persia is the demon who is in charge of the spiritual nature of Persia. What it's telling us is that the rise and falls of empires and kings is not a natural event. It's not just because of political opposition or military might, that there is a spiritual dimension behind everything that happens. There's a spirit that runs all of the nations. We talked a few weeks ago about the spirit of Rome, right? And we got that from the etymology. Rome is named after Romulus, who is the son of Mars, who is the god of war. So the city of Rome is the city of the son of the god of war. It's going to be inherently violent because it's fueled by a violent warlike spirit. And of course, it manifests in this war that conquered the world for hundreds and hundreds of years. And with the descriptions there and, perfecting crucifixion and all the other cruelties that came out of Rome. So therefore, the spirits that fuel everything would also be behind the king of the north and king of the south. There would be a spirit that is true with every single manifestation of those characters all throughout time. Now, we studied this on Tuesday all the way up to verse 35, I think it was. That's the first time we saw the time of the end. Verses 36 through 39, I'm going to suggest to you themselves describe the French Revolution. Now, you don't see those words in there, and I can't prove it, but, the very fact that the time of the end shows up in verse 35 and then again in verse 40 really tells us that the content in between those has to do with the timing of the time of the end, or 1798, or the French Revolution. And then as we read some of the details in there, like verse 37, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. The French Revolution was an all-out assault on the things of God. Not just what we read about on Tuesday, where the state took control of the church and made the priests employees, but we're going to read this also. This is from a different Wikipedia article about the Reign of Terror, which was a subcategory of the French Revolution. The French Revolution was like 10 or 11 years long. The Reign of Terror was only like 18 months long or something like that. But this was the period of extreme violence where tens of thousands of people were murdered at the hands of the state or in the general violence and chaos of the rebellions and uprisings and whatnot. How did that happen? So Wikipedia is going to tell us. What was the spirit that fueled all that bloodshed? Enlightenment thought emphasized the importance of rational thinking and began challenging legal and moral foundations of society, providing the leaders of the Reign of Terror with new ideas about the role and structure of government. You see that? What was the operating principle behind those who executed the Reign of Terror? It was rational thinking. It was humanism, right? It was the isms that are left over when God is taken away. Let's continue to read. This next sentence, I can't figure it out as it's written. It must be a typo, but I don't know. Rousseau's social contract argued that each person was black and that they would come together in forming a government that would then protect those rights. So I think that's a typo. I don't think that he argued that every person was black, and I don't know what that would have to do with anybody's rights. But the point is, the part of the kind of philosophy fueling this was that everybody had natural rights that the government was supposed to protect. Now, that in of itself sounds pretty good. But under the social contract, the government was required to act for the general will, which represented the interests of everyone rather than a few factions. Yikes. Again, sounds great, but practically, humanity is infinitely diverse. How do you have one entity, the government, that represents all of that, equally? That seems like a pipe dream. Drawing from the idea of a general will, Robespierre felt that the French Revolution could result in a republic built for the general will, but only once those who fought this ideal were expelled. Those who resisted the government were deemed tyrants, fighting against the virtue and honor of the general will. The leaders felt that their ideal version of government was threatened from the inside and outside of France, and terror was the only way to preserve the dignity of the republic created from the French Revolution. Whoa, okay, so do you get it? They waged war on all of the things of God. And it's not listed in the article, but they even tried to recreate the calendar with a week that had 10 days in it, because the only reason a week has 7 days is Genesis chapter 1. So they were so intent to war against God that they wanted to wipe him even off of the calendar. And they replaced Christian thinking, Catholic thinking, spiritual thinking. They replaced it with human thinking, right? With rational thinking, humanism, right? Humanist ideas. But those are devoid of grace, as we just read. Oh, this is a great ideal, but it's only going to work if we destroy all of the opposition, and that's if that's not a story of the 20th century, I don't know what is. I mean, that's how every communist revolution ever has operated. We've got an ideal, a utopia, but it's only going to work after we murder everybody who disagrees. This is the spirit of the French Revolution. Now, when we read in Daniel 11, it's the king of the north who we saw back in verse 28 returns to his land with great riches, and his heart is then moved against the Holy Covenant. And also in verse 30, he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. So he's allying himself with the enemies of God. And yet, this is the church that bears God's name. Now, I don't have the time to prove that, but it follows the same pattern of Daniel 2 and 7 and 8, where pagan Rome is replaced by Holy Rome, right? The church that was the ruler over Europe for 1,000 years and more. So even though he is behaving in such a way that is clearly against God, he's walking around with at least the appearance of and moniker of God. So it's religionism. And that was part of the French Revolution too. In the parts of the revolution that were actually civilized, the French government, parliament, I don't know if I'm using the right word, but the French government was split along these same lines. The kind of traditionalists who were Catholic and for the monarchy, and then the kind of new thinkers, the Robespierres and the Voltaires, who were humanist and secularist. And they actually sat in different sides of the government. And this is from which we get the terms left and right, because on the left were seated all of the humanists and secularists, and on the right were seated all of the monarchists and traditionalists and religionists. So that terminology is still with us. We apply those same terms to American politics in the 21st century. Therefore, we're seeing who the kings of the North and South are, spiritually speaking. The king of the North would be those religionists, the traditionalists, the monarchists, right? The ones who want the form of religion over everything. And then the king of the South would be the leftists, the humanists, the Voltaires and the Robespierres, the rational thinkers, so to speak, right? So you following with me? Once we identify those two kind of spiritual camps, it's not hard to realize that has formed the entirety of Western history since, and at least since World War II in the 1940s, it's really defined worldwide culture to some degree. It's as the world is becoming less and less Christian, more and more secular. Um, we see the interplay and continuing ongoing warfare of these two sets of ideas even into our present day. So let's go back to the chapter here and read the latter part, starting in verse 40. Okay. And I'm going to tell you, even though we have defined the time of the end as the French Revolution, 1798, I believe there is yet to come another manifestation of everything, of the time of the end problem. And here's why. In verse 40, we're told at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack the king of the north, and then the king of the north counterattacks so severely that it wipes the king of the south off the planet for the rest of time. And the king of the north is dominant over everything until Jesus comes. And that is simply not how history has gone. Since the time of the French Revolution, if anything, the king of the south has become stronger, considerably stronger. And there have been many, many rulers over the world since that time. Britain, France, Germany tried. It's been America since World War II until we lost the Afghan war. I don't know who it's going to be now. So anyway, just history doesn't fit. So I'm looking for an end times fulfillment for the last few verses, but I don't think it's dishonest to do that because, again, we saw the time of the end twice. We saw it in verse 35, followed by several verses describing the horror and chaos of atheism and the way that manifests. And then we see it again in verse 40. So that just seems to me like the principle of first fruits or type and antitype, right? Where we have the kind of all of the data is present there at the beginning in a smaller form. And then as time goes on, that same data simply enlarges to a larger form, but it's the same thing. So what therefore I'm trying to get at is that we're looking for a repeat of the conflict between the left and right, religionism and atheism, or whatever you want to attach, whatever ism you want to use there. We're looking for that to repeat at the very end of time. So what is that going to look like? Well, verse 40 says, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack the king of the north. Secularism attacks the foundation of traditional Christianity. And then the king of the north counterattacks, shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. And from there is no more king of the south. It is simply the king of the north on a rampage until Jesus comes. So the first part of verse 40 there says secularism, humanism, atheism, communism, socialism, all of those isms that really are different ways of saying the same thing. Those will be on an attack. That word is even used in the scripture here, attack. It's not just advancing, it's attacking. And I've been alive for the last 15 years. I've seen it. We went from George W. Bush to Barack Obama. We went from we're fighting a holy war against the Iraqis to maybe we shouldn't just take God out of the entire Democratic Party platform, and it went like that. Like in one presidential cycle, the culture shifted, and it's been shifting toward Obamaism, so to speak, ever since. if you were to follow any of my personal social media accounts for any reason, you would see that I post things that are not just this show. I post a number of videos about the Bible reliably. When I say something nice about the Bible or nice about God, I will be met with an onslaught of hatred from atheists and humanists and secularists and etc. They call themselves all sorts of different things, but they're just full of the most vile hatred. They attack for no reason. They use foul language. They attack me personally. And so this is just on full display. This is an attack. I don't believe that that spirit was manifest in the 1980s or 1990s or even early 2000s, right? This is a spirit that has been unleashed upon our society, and it's evident everywhere now. And that's bad. And like people like me and you, believers in God, you know, that's like horrible to us, and it makes us feel bad and makes us angry sometimes, and we just want it to go away. We want it to stop. We want those people to get to know God. We want to return to the way that things used to be under whatever, under Reagan, under whatever, even under Trump. I don't care who you put. I want to return to my formerly Christian society. Well, okay. Daniel 11 says that's coming. But Daniel 11 says it's coming not well. Do you get it? When the king of the north counterattacks, he takes over the world with that counterattack. And so I don't know what will prompt the counterattack. I've been waiting for it. I mean, through the entirety of the Trump administration, where like the left just didn't leave this man alone for even a second, for 4 years in a row, they attacked him. I thought this was coming back then, but then Biden took over, and we've been met with, I mean, you've lived through the Biden administration, you know what it's been like. And so the assault by the king of the South is ongoing. And I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for it to be so bad that the king of the North, the conservatives, the Republicans, maybe, whoever, right, where they've had enough of it and the counterattack comes to wipe secularism off the planet. I've been waiting for it. It hasn't come yet. The Republican Party is still masterful at snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. That's like the one thing they're really good at. And so there hasn't yet been that real resistance to the king of the South. And last week's election, same thing. Like, who in their right mind would continue to vote for what has led us into this like catastrophe of the Biden administration? And yet that's largely what the election did. Almost like there's some other force at work holding back the counter movement until the time is right. And so we're going to talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. I know I've kept you here longer than I probably should have for today, and I want to respect your time. But this is, I believe this is what we're seeing. It's still the assault of the king of the South. The king of the North is holding it back to some degree, right? There's a good election result in Mississippi and a good election result somewhere else, maybe, right? But largely it's failing. And that's because when the king of the North counterattacks, that's the last major thing in the world. Daniel 11 goes on from there, and like 4 of the remaining 5 verses are just descriptions of how big and powerful and terrible the king of the North is. And it's only in that last verse or 2 where we start to see his downfall, because Jesus is coming, right? So as much as I hate the onslaught of secularism, and I would love to just say something nice about God on social media without being bombarded for 4 days by people telling me all sorts of nonsense, you know what I want even worse than that? Well, what I want, let me say that again. You know what I want less than that? You know what I want the counterattack even less than I want the king of the South. Because even though the counterattack is going to say Jesus, Jesus, Jesus all day long, none of it will be of Jesus. And really, it's just be a worse blaspheming of his name than the trolls on Facebook when I say something nice about God, right? So I'm going to leave you with that. I don't want to get too much into tomorrow's show. That's what tomorrow is for. So have mercy. I know this has been a lot. Have a great night. Let's pray. Father, once again, we ask you to sort our thoughts as we sleep so that we may wake with better understanding. Help us to see clearly that the left and the right, religionism versus secularism, these ideas are not new and they're not random. They are exactly what you told us about. And you also told us how it's going to go. So give us grace, as much as we may hate the predations of organized religion, or as much as we may hate the kind of nihilism of atheism or whatever, right? Regardless of our feelings about these major issues, give us grace enough to recognize that neither one of those are our master. And we'll remember what we learned yesterday, that the only safe place is in verse 22 with the Prince of the Covenant on the cross. Oh, thank you, Father. Thank you for all that you do for us. Give us good rest and grace enough to return again tomorrow. Amen. All right. Lastly, before we go, let's make sure if you're on Facebook that you like the page. If you're on YouTube, that you subscribe to the channel, hit your notification bell. On Rumble, you want to follow the channel. On Locals, you want to join for free and hopefully also become a paid supporter. That helps us a lot. But all of that is secondary to our new website, tdimedia.org. So check that out and have a good sleep. And I'll see you back here tomorrow. May God bless you.